At my son's grand housewarming party, my wife closed her hand around my wrist and did not let go. Her fingers pressed through the sleeve of my jacket until I could feel her nails. She leaned into my shoulder and spoke so quietly, I nearly missed it under the sound of laughter and champagne glasses touching all around us. "We have to go, right now." I turned to look at her, confused. "Go, Eleanor. We just got here. What's wrong?" She didn't answer. Her eyes flicked once toward the staircase, then back to me, and she pulled. She said nothing more, not a single word, until the two of us were sitting inside our car with the doors shut and the party glowing behind us through the windshield. Only then did she turn to me, her face the colour of paper, and ask the question that split my life cleanly into a before and an after. "You never actually saw the final paperwork, did you?" What she told me next in that dark car left me colder than I had ever been in my life. "My name is Warren Ashford. As of this morning, I am exactly 72 years old, and I spent 48 of those years turning a single second-hand lathe in a rented garage into Ashford Precision, a manufacturing company that machines parts for aircraft, medical devices, and half the heavy equipment that rolls through this state. My wife Eleanor stood beside me for every day of it. We ate cold sandwiches over the workbench when there was no money for anything better. We drove trucks ourselves when we couldn't afford drivers. We built something honest out of nothing but our own hands and our own stubbornness. We had one child, a son, Nathan. We gave that boy everything we never had. We paid for his university, every semester in full. We paid for his wedding to Vanessa, a lavish affair with 300 guests and a live orchestra. And just 5 weeks ago, I wired $1.4 million, in full, as the down payment on a $2.8 million estate in the wealthy hills north of the city. It was meant to be their forever home, a place to raise the grandchildren Eleanor and I had prayed for. That was the dream. Or so I believed. That evening was the grand housewarming. The long, curving driveway was packed bumper to bumper with luxury cars I did not recognise. Caterers in black vests circled the rooms with silver trays. Everything gleamed. And yet, the moment Eleanor and I walked through those tall front doors, something felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. Nathan and Vanessa were barely hosting. Instead, it was Vanessa's mother, Vivienne, who stood in the centre of the great room like a queen receiving her subjects. Vivienne Fairmont was a woman who had spent her whole life acting as though she owned everything her eyes landed on, despite never, to my knowledge, having built or earned a single thing. She moved from guest to guest, gesturing at the crown moulding and the imported stone, describing the renovations as though she had personally chosen every slab. I told myself I was being unfair. She was an excited mother, enjoying her daughter's good fortune. That was all. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and stood near the edge of the kitchen, watching my son. Nathan looked nervous. He kept straightening a tie that didn't need straightening. Every time I caught his eye, he found a reason to look away. Twice I started across the room to ask him how the move had gone, and both times Vanessa appeared from nowhere, laced her arm through his, and steered him off to greet someone I'd never met. It began to feel deliberate. The house was full of people, and I had never felt more like a stranger in it. A stranger standing in rooms my own money had paid for. That was the moment Eleanor found me and took my arm. My wife is not a fragile woman. She kept her composure through bankruptcy scares, through the year we nearly lost the business, through the death of her own parents. In 48 years I've seen her frightened perhaps twice. Seeing that same fear in her face at a party sent ice straight down my spine. She led me out the front doors, away from the noise, and we walked quickly down that long driveway to where I'd parked. She locked the doors the instant we were inside, then pressed her purse against her chest and worked to catch her breath. "Eleanor," I said, gripping the wheel. "Talk to me. What happened? Did Vivienne say something to you?" She shook her head slowly. A single tear ran down and she let it. I went upstairs to use the restroom. The one on the main floor was busy. I passed the study. The door was standing wide open. And Vivienne was inside. She wasn't just standing there, Warren. She was holding a glass of wine, showing something on the wall to 3 of her friends. And they were laughing. Laughing at what? At us. Her voice trembled between grief and fury. There's a framed document hanging behind the desk, a property deed. I walked closer, pretending to admire the woodwork, and I read the names on it. My stomach began to tighten. "Nathan and Vanessa," I said. "No." She looked straight at me. "Nathan's name's not on that deed. Vanessa's name is not on that deed. The property is owned by a limited liability company, an LLC. The air in the car seemed to thin out. What LLC? Fairmont Holdings. Fairmont. That was Vivienne's maiden name. The name she used constantly to boast about a bloodline she claimed traced back to old money and old estates. My hands went tight on the wheel. "Are you certain?" I asked, and I heard how low and careful my own voice had become. "I'm certain," Eleanor whispered. "I saw the state seal. I saw the registration date. It was filed 3 weeks ago, right after you sent the money. Warren, you didn't buy a house for our son. You bought a $2.8 million estate for Vivian. She owns all of it." I sat in the dark and the silence pressed in on me. 48 years. 48 years of missed dinners and 18-hour days, all so that my son would inherit something solid, something safe. And he had taken my life's work and handed the keys to his mother-in-law. I am not a man who falls apart. I am a man who solves problems. A cold, clear fury settled over the shock. I took out my phone and dialed Nathan's cell. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I pictured my son in that bright living room, playing the successful homeowner while the woman who actually held the title paraded around him. The call connected, but it was not my son's voice. A high, satisfied little laugh came through the speaker. "Oh, Warren," Vivian purred. "Nathan is far too busy carrying my furniture up to the master suite to come to the phone. Thank you truly for the lovely gift." The line went dead. Eleanor was crying softly beside me. Vivian had just confirmed, in 5 seconds, everything I had been afraid to believe. I put the car in gear and drove us home. Sleep was out of the question. I sat in my home office, the same room where I'd sketched the first business plan for Ashford Precision half a lifetime ago, and I opened the county property portal. It took me 9 minutes to find exactly what Eleanor had seen. The deed to the estate was registered to Fairmont Holdings, LLC. I pulled the state's corporate registry next. The sole managing member of Fairmont Holdings was Vivian Fairmont. My son and daughter-in-law held nothing. 0 equity in the home my $1.4 million had bought. I printed every page. The printer hummed away in the quiet, spitting out the evidence of my son's betrayal, 1 sheet at a time. I slid it all into a folder and waited for the sun. At 6:40 the next morning, I pulled into the executive lot at Ashford Precision. For years, walking into that glass and steel building had filled me with quiet pride. That morning I felt only a heavy, sinking dread. I nodded at the security desk, walked past my own office, and went straight to the finance wing. I had made Nathan Chief Financial Officer 3 years earlier. I'd handed him that title, believing he had the character to steward the company I intended to leave him. I pushed open his door without knocking. He was behind his enormous desk with a coffee, eyes on a pair of monitors. He looked up, startled. "Dad," he said, recovering fast, sliding a practiced smile into place. "You're here early. I thought you and Mum were sleeping in after the party. We missed you at the toast." I did not smile back. I set the folder on the desk, opened it, and slid the printed county records across to him without a word. He looked down. I watched the colour drain out of his face as his eyes found the name on the registry. Fairmont Holdings. A bead of sweat formed at his hairline. "Would you like to explain?" I said very calmly. "Why my $1.4 million bought a mansion for your mother-in-law?" "Dad, it's not what it looks like." His smooth executive voice was gone. "You don't have the full picture. There's a reason we structured it this way." "I understand it perfectly," I said, leaning in. "I gave you money to secure your family's future, and you quietly signed the deed over to Vivian. She answered your phone last night to laugh at me about it. So you have 1 minute to tell me the truth before I call the bank and report fraud." Before he could invent anything, the door opened. Vanessa walked in carrying 2 coffees and a box of pastries. "Warren," she said, sugar in her voice, "we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I said, not looking away from Nathan. She set the coffees down, saw the papers, and I watched her posture harden. The sweet daughter-in-law vanished. "Did you go digging through public records to spy on us?" she snapped, planting herself half in front of her husband like a shield. "That is a serious violation of our privacy, Warren. It's controlling. Frankly, it's toxic." "Toxic," I repeated. "I handed you over $1 million, Vanessa. I have every right to know whose name is on the title. It was a gift, she said. A gift means you let it go. It means you trust your son. Instead, you're sneaking around investigating us like criminals. Nathan found his nerve now that he had reinforcements. Mum and Dad, you're reacting emotionally instead of logically, he said, shaking his head slowly. You don't understand modern financial planning. You can't storm in here throwing accusations. They stood shoulder to shoulder, and they weren't looking at me with guilt. They were looking at me with irritation, as though I were the problem. Then Nathan sighed, opened a drawer, and produced a thick black folder with an accounting firm's gold logo on the cover. He set it down and pressed his palms flat on it, and the confidence came flooding back into his face. Sit down, Dad, he said. Let me explain to you how the tax system actually works. And when I'm finished, I'll expect an apology. He opened the folder with slow, deliberate movements and began to lecture me. The world of large financial transfers, he said, was not as simple as it had been when I bought my first house. If I had wired the money directly into their accounts, they'd have been crushed by gift tax. Vivian's accountant, a man who managed portfolios for the wealthiest families in the state, had advised routing the funds through a temporary holding vehicle. Fairmont Holdings, he said, was just a shell, a protective barrier. Vivian was acting as a temporary trustee. According to the timeline right there in the documents, the LLC would dissolve in 90 days, and on the 91st day, the deed would transfer to Nathan and Vanessa's names. We were protecting your investment, he said, not stealing it. We wanted to handle the stress ourselves so you could enjoy your retirement. It was a beautiful performance. The terminology was flawless. To an ordinary man, it would have sounded responsible and even generous. But I have spent my entire adult life inside corporate tax law. And I knew, instantly, that every word was a lie. You do not use your mother-in-law's personal LLC to dodge gift tax on your child's home. It's legally absurd. It was a fairy tale dressed in the costume of a spreadsheet. I kept my face blank. And Vanessa, sensing the folder hadn't convinced me, changed tactics. Her lip began to tremble. Tears arrived right on schedule. Warren, how could you think so little of us? She said, her voice cracking. My mother has worked herself to exhaustion this month, meeting with lawyers just to protect us. She took on the legal liability of that holding company for our sake. She's sacrificing for this family, and instead of thanking her, you're treating her like a criminal. She put a trembling hand on Nathan's shoulder. We wanted to surprise you when the title transferred. Your lack of trust is deeply wounding. You're trying to control our marriage with your money, and it's tearing this family apart. Nathan came around the desk and wrapped his arm around his weeping wife. Please, Dad, he said softly. Don't ruin the family over a misunderstanding about tax structures. Just give it 90 days. You'll see the deed transfer. Just trust me. I stood there in the middle of the office I had built, and I understood something clearly. Fighting them with logic and anger would get me nowhere. They were braced for a war. They were not braced for surrender. If I wanted the truth, I needed them to believe they had fooled me. I needed to become the tired, confused old man they already thought I was. So I let my shoulders sag. I pinched the bridge of my nose and let out a long, shaky breath. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I'm getting old, Nathan. These modern structures confuse me. When your mother saw Vivian's name on that deed, it shook us both. We panicked. I should have trusted you. I apologise for storming in. The change in the room was instant. The tension drained out of them. Vanessa sniffled and gave me a small, forgiving smile. They exchanged a quick glance of pure victory. The old man had folded. It's okay, Dad, Nathan said, his easy tone back. We know you were just looking out for us. Let's put it behind us. Thank you, son, I said. I'll let you get back to work. I turned and shuffled toward the heavy glass door, moving like a beaten man, and I reached for the steel handle. And as I pulled the door open, the bright hallway light turned the thick glass into a mirror. A mirror angled perfectly to show the desk behind me. Nathan thought I wasn't looking. He thought I was broken. In the reflection, I watched him drop back into his chair, grab his mouse, and drag a folder on his screen straight into the trash. The label on that folder was large enough to read in the glass. Ashford Trust _ Disbursements. The Ashford Precision Employee Retirement Trust. 400 families' futures. The drive home was a blur. A tax dodge on a house was greed, ugly but ordinary. Touching the employee retirement trust was something else entirely. 400 people had handed me their futures across the decades. If Nathan was moving that money, he wasn't just stealing from me. He was gutting the lives of people who had given their whole working lives to my company. And Nathan didn't have the nerve to run a crime like this alone. He was cautious, to a fault. Someone was pushing him. I needed to see how these people behaved when they thought no one was watching. That afternoon, I bought an expensive crystal vase from a boutique downtown, the perfect olive branch from a defeated father. And I drove out to the estate a little after 2. The iron gates stood open. Landscapers were shaping the lawn. The front door was ajar. I stepped quietly into the marble foyer and let the shadows keep me for a moment. And I heard Vivian's voice, sharp and demanding, coming from the great room. I followed it. What I saw stopped me cold. Nathan, chief financial officer of a company worth tens of millions, was on his hands and knees on the floor, holding a tape measure against the edge of an enormous rug. Vivian stood over him with a teacup, looking down as though he were something she'd found on her shoe. 2 inches to the left, Nathan, she snapped. I told you I wanted it centered under the chandelier. Are you incapable of following one instruction? Sorry, Vivian, he mumbled, not daring to look up. I'll fix it. She snapped her fingers twice at him. A sharp, degrading sound. The designer arrives in 20 minutes. I won't have my home looking like a mess because of your incompetence. I watched my son shrink into himself. The arrogant executive who had lectured me that morning was gone. In his place was a frightened servant kneeling in his own supposed home. I stepped forward, letting my shoes click loudly on the marble. Nathan jumped up, brushing at his knees, his face going red. Vivian turned, eyes narrowing at the vase in my hands. Vanessa appeared from the kitchen and stopped dead. Warren, what are you doing here without calling? I gave them my warmest, most apologetic smile. I came to bring this, I said, holding up the vase. I overstepped this morning. I want peace between us. Vivian's lips curled into a smug little smile. Well, that's very mature of you, Warren. Put it on the side table. Mind the wood. I set it down and turned to Nathan, keeping my tone light. While I'm here, quick question. Are we still on track to bring the second machining line online by November? It was a softball. Any executive could answer it in his sleep. Nathan opened his mouth, and Vanessa stepped directly between us, blocking him from view like a guard dog. Nathan isn't working today, Warren. We're focused on setting up my mother's house. Your little factory can wait until Monday. My mother's house? She said it without even noticing. Of course, I said. I understand completely. Let me just use the restroom and get out of your way. I walked down the hall toward the guest bath, but I already knew exactly where Vivian's study was. The door stood open. I slipped inside. The room smelled of perfume and leather. I crossed toward the mahogany desk, and as I moved around the chair, the toe of my shoe caught the rim of a metal wastebasket and tipped it over, spilling crumpled paper across the floor. I crouched to clean it up before anyone heard. And a red logo caught my eye. I flattened the torn pages against my knee. They were final demand letters, not from casinos, from a private lending firm and a foreign development bank, addressed to Vivian Fairmont, referencing something called the Palm Cay Resort Partnership. The numbers at the bottom, printed in red, demanded immediate wire transfers to cover defaulted margins and compounding penalties. The figures were staggering. Millions of dollars. I understood then. Vivian Fairmont was not a wealthy aristocrat sheltering her family's money. She was broke. She had been broke for years. She had poured what real fortune she once had into a luxury resort development overseas that had collapsed and taken everything with it, and she had been living on appearances and borrowed money ever since. Now the people she'd borrowed from wanted paying, and she was using my son and my employee's retirement trust to keep herself afloat. I put the torn letters back into the basket exactly as I'd found them, stood, smoothed my jacket, and walked out. Nathan and Vanessa were where I'd left them. I told them I was glad we'd cleared the air, wished them a pleasant afternoon, and let myself out. When I got home, Eleanor was waiting in the kitchen. I poured a glass of water and told her everything. The deleted retirement trust file, the way Vivian treated our son, the demand letters in the trash. She covered her mouth. We have to call the police, Warren. No. I took her hands. Not yet. If we go to the police now, Nathan erases everything. He controls the servers, the ledgers, all of it. He'll say I'm a confused old man making wild accusations and Vanessa will back him. We can't win a war of words against two people who've been rehearsing their lies for months. I need proof they can't argue with. Raw data, straight off the company servers. And I have to get it without Nathan ever knowing I looked. That evening I did everything normally. Dinner, the news, bed at the usual hour. If Nathan was watching me in any way, I wanted him to see nothing but a tired old man settling into a quiet life. But I lay awake in the dark, listening to the clock in the hall, waiting. At 2 a.m, I slipped out of bed, went down to my office and locked the door. When I handed Nathan the keys to the finances 3 years ago, one of the first things he did was change every administrative password, quietly locking me out of the day-to-day systems. He wanted total control, and he believed his security was airtight. But Nathan had forgotten something. I did not just found this company. 20 years ago, before we had an IT department, I personally supervised the wiring of our first network. I wrote the original administrative backdoor myself. I opened a terminal and began typing in old credentials that hadn't been used in 15 years, holding my breath, hoping the buried legacy code was still there. The screen turned green. I was in. I bypassed the polished quarterly reports Nathan showed the board and went straight into the master CFO ledger. I began pulling vendor payout logs, scanning thousands of transactions. Fuel, maintenance, leases, payroll. For an hour, everything looked infuriatingly ordinary. He'd buried his tracks well. Then I found it. A recurring monthly payment, authorized by the CFO. $45,000, filed under the vague heading Strategic Operations Advisory. The vendor, Crestline Advisory Group. I clicked the vendor profile and pulled the billing address. It was a condominium on the east side of the city, the exact address where Vivian had lived before Vanessa married my son. $45,000 a month of my company's revenue, funneled to my son's mother-in-law to feed the debt she was drowning in. I reached to start a mass download of the records, my finger over the trackpad, and I clicked. The screen froze and flashed a violent red. A security warning filled the monitor. Admin override detected, notifying CFO. The trap had sprung. Nathan would know instantly that someone had been inside his network hunting him. I held the power button until the machine went black. Then I made myself think. Nathan would get that alert on his phone within seconds. Given what he was hiding, he wouldn't wait for morning. He'd come straight here. I had to be ready. I pulled out a stack of old paper retirement statements and scattered them across the desk to make the room look like the workspace of a confused old man fumbling with his own finances. Then I went back to bed beside Eleanor and watched the clock. At 6:15, the crunch of tyres filled the driveway. A car door slammed, then a frantic pounding at the front door. I put a gentle hand on Eleanor's shoulder, told her to stay put, and pulled on my robe, tying the belt crooked on purpose, mussing my hair, making my footsteps heavy and slow on the stairs. I opened the door. Nathan stood on the porch, still in yesterday's clothes, eyes bloodshot and darting. He pushed past me into the foyer. "Dad, we have an emergency," he said, breathless. The financial servers were breached at 2 a.m, a master administrative override from the legacy access ports. The IP traced back to this house. "Did someone break into your office?" I let my shoulders slump. I rubbed my temples and gave a long, embarrassed sigh. "Oh, Nathan, I'm so sorry. There's no hacker, son. It was me." He froze. "You? What were you doing in the central ledger at 2 a.m? I shook my head. The very picture of a frustrated old man, defeated by technology. I couldn't sleep. I came down to look over my retirement statements. I like to check the quarterly numbers, but that new software you installed is impossible to navigate. I couldn't find my dashboard. I kept clicking and warnings kept popping up. I tried my old passwords from the legacy system, hoping to get through, and I suppose I set off an alarm. The screen turned red and froze, so I got frustrated and unplugged the whole thing and went to bed. "I'm sorry I scared you. I feel like a fool." I watched the relief flood through him. The terror in his eyes dissolved into that familiar, patronizing arrogance. "Unbelievable," he scoffed, dropping his head back. "Dad, you can't just type deprecated admin codes into a modern network. You triggered a full security cascade. I thought we were under a coordinated cyber attack. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder, a gesture of dominance dressed as comfort. Listen to me. You're too old to be messing with this technology now. If you ever want to see your pension files, you call my assistant and we'll print them. Do not log into those servers again. You'll only cause damage. You're right, son, I murmured, eyes on the floor. I'll leave the heavy lifting to you. He patted my shoulder. Get some rest, Dad. And he left. I watched his car disappear around the corner. My posture straightened. The trembling in my hands stopped. I picked up a second phone, a burner, and dialed a number I knew by heart. Gerald, I said, my voice stripped of every trace of paternal softness. I need you to quietly take my son's life apart. Gerald Voss did not ask questions. He was a forensic auditor, a ghost who could trace a single stolen dollar through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. When I hung up, I felt calm for the first time in days. The trap was set. Now I had to play my part. The chance came that Friday. Eleanor had invited Nathan, Vanessa, and Vivian to a family dinner, a long-standing tradition. She spent the afternoon on her famous pot roast, with no idea what Gerald was uncovering. I hadn't told her. I needed her reactions to be real, and I needed Nathan to see nothing but an ordinary family evening. They arrived at 7. Nathan carried an expensive bottle of wine and a relaxed smile. The panic of that morning long gone. He believed he'd neutralised the threat. Vanessa followed with flowers, playing the devoted daughter-in-law. And then came Vivian, sweeping in as though inspecting a village, draped in silk and diamonds I now knew were financed with my employees' retirement savings. She embraced Eleanor stiffly and immediately complained that our air conditioning was too aggressive for her delicate constitution. At the table, Eleanor brought out the roast surrounded by vegetables and fresh herbs, a warm, honest meal. Vivian prodded her meat with a fork like a specimen. "This is so wonderfully rustic, Eleanor," she said sweetly. "It reminds me of the simple food my grandmother made during the rationing years. You must give the recipe to my chef. He's always looking for heavy dishes for the groundskeepers." Eleanor's face flushed. She looked down at her plate. Vanessa laughed lightly and patted her hand. "Don't mind her. Mother has such refined tastes now." I cut my meat slowly and forced a warm, oblivious smile. "We're simple people, Vivian," I said cheerfully. "We stick to the classics. I'm just glad we can all be together as a family." Nathan leaned back, wine in hand, thoroughly enjoying his sense of superiority. "It's a great evening, Dad. Everything's running perfectly. You don't have a single thing to worry about. Just sit back and let me handle it." At that exact moment, the burner phone in my pocket buzzed. One sharp pulse. I kept my smile fixed, lowered my left hand under the table, and slid the phone out, screen dimmed to almost nothing. A message from Gerald Voss. The dig had struck gold. Fairmont Holdings is a hollow shell registered in Delaware. No legitimate operations. Pure pass-through for inbound wires. I took a bite, chewing slowly, as Vivian complained about the wine. I glanced down again. Breached the Crestline advisory ledger. Completely fraudulent. No employees, no services. The $45,000 monthly advisory fees from Ashford Precision Route through a processor straight into an account at Meridian Trust of Nevis. I looked up at Vivian, dabbing her mouth and criticising the lighting. A parasite, draining my life's work, complaining about my dining room. The phone buzzed again, traced the outbound routing from Nevis. Money doesn't stay. Within 24 hours of receiving Ashford funds, it wires out to 2 entities, a private recovery lending firm tied to the Palm Cay collapse and an offshore consolidation account. She's leveraging the house to cover the margins. Debt is astronomical. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Nathan sat across from me, laughing at something Vanessa said, utterly unaware that his entire scheme was being dismantled beneath my dinner plate. I wanted to shout. I stayed perfectly still. One more buzz. Longer this time. "Warren, step outside. You need to hear the rest in person. It's worse than the cash flow." I slid the phone away and cleared my throat. "Excuse me a moment. The roast was rich. I'll get some air." Eleanor looked at me with concern. I gave her a reassuring smile, pushed back my chair, and walked out through the kitchen into the cool night. I crossed the lawn to the quiet lot behind our community centre, where a dark sedan, sat under the oak trees. I opened the passenger door and slid inside. Gerald Voss didn't offer a greeting. He dealt only in facts. Brace yourself, Warren. Your son didn't just skim cash. He steered the whole ship into a wall. Tell me, the Palm Cay recovery firm cut Vivian's terms off 6 months ago and sold her debt to private enforcers. She owes them over $3 million, compounding weekly. $45,000 a month doesn't cover it. Nathan needed a much bigger pool of untraceable money. He brought up a ledger on his laptop. He crossed the line. He's been draining the Ashford Precision Employee Retirement Trust. He's already pulled over $4.6 million from the principal, routing it through Fairmont Holdings out to Nevis. The retirement trust, I whispered. The savings of people who gave their lives to this company. There's a reason he felt safe taking that risk, Gerald went on. He knew touching that fund would eventually draw regulators, so he built himself a fall guy. He dropped a thick stack of printed documents on my lap. I found these in a hidden partition on the main server. Nathan used your digital signature to forge binding declarations, naming you as the personal guarantor of Vivian's debt. He forged executive orders authorizing the shell subsidiaries that drained the trust. Every illegal transfer has your name at the top of the chain. I stared at the forged signatures. They looked perfectly real. If regulators open a case, or if those enforcers come to collect, every trail leads to your home office, Gerald said. Nathan structured this so he looks like a subordinate following his aging father's erratic orders. If it collapses, you go to federal prison, and he takes control of whatever's left. My jaw locked. My own son had planned my ruin and my imprisonment. How long until the annual audit? I asked, and my voice came out flat and mechanical. 3 weeks. The external auditors will see the deficit in the trust immediately. Gerald exhaled. But Nathan knows that too. He doesn't plan to let you take the fall after the audit. He plans to spring the trap before the auditors ever arrive. He pulled a final document from his briefcase, sealed in plastic, and held it out. I read the title. My blood turned to ice. It was a drafted petition for emergency medical conservatorship. I intercepted emails between Nathan, Vanessa, and a compliant private judge, Gerald said, disgust in his voice. They plan to file next week in a closed session. They'll testify under oath that your behaviour has become erratic and dangerous, that you're suffering from advanced dementia and destroying the company. Once the judge signs it, you lose all legal authority. They'll place you in a locked facility in rural Montana, isolated, all communication controlled. You won't be able to reach Eleanor, a lawyer, or the police. And Nathan will use his power as conservator to blame the missing money on your decline and walk away with everything. They were going to bury me alive. I handed the plastic sleeve back. I did not shed a tear. I looked at Gerald and nodded. The time for grief was over. Start securing everything tonight, I said. Trace every dollar, build a wall around my personal assets, and build it fast. The next morning I began the performance of my life. If they needed a senile old man to sell their conservatorship to a judge, I would give them a masterpiece. I walked into the kitchen, where Eleanor was pouring coffee, and Nathan stood reading something on his tablet. I looked at my son and let my face go slack and vacant. "Good morning, Peter," I said, using the name of my late brother, 20 years gone. Did the second shift finish the run yet? Nathan lowered the tablet slowly, exchanging a wide-eyed glance with Eleanor. "Dad, it's me, Nathan. Uncle Peter passed a long time ago. Are you feeling okay?" I blinked and pressed a hand to my forehead, muttered something about not sleeping well, and let it go. That afternoon, when Vanessa dropped by with fabric swatches, I opened the refrigerator to grab water and quietly set my car keys on the middle shelf next to the milk. Then I went to the living room and began patting my pockets, complaining loudly that I'd lost my keys again. Vanessa sprang into action like a patronising nurse, and within 3 minutes she opened the fridge, gasped with theatrical shock, and held the keys up for Nathan to see. I caught the barely contained glee in her eyes. I watched Nathan quietly pull out his phone and type a note, documenting my decline for their court filing. They were building their case, never suspecting they were performing on a stage I had built. By day I played the crumbling patriarch. By night I went to war, to find it. Because the company was still legally in my name, and the forged guarantor documents hadn't yet been activated by the enforcers, I had a narrow window. Working with Gerald and my personal attorneys in secure locations after midnight, I moved fast. First, I liquidated my personal stock holdings and moved the capital into blind trusts, completely insulated from Ashford Precision and from Nathan's reach. Second, my attorneys worked directly with federal fraud investigators to place holds on the forged guarantor documents, building a firewall between my identity and Vivian's debt. If the enforcers came, they'd hit a wall. But the most important move was structural. 30 years ago, I had personally financed the construction of our main manufacturing plant, and the company still carried a large mortgage lien on that property. Quietly, I executed a legal transfer, moving that lien out of the company and into my own private trust. In a single stroke, I stopped being a vulnerable founder and became the untouchable senior creditor of my own company. If Nathan somehow seized control through a fake conservatorship, he'd inherit a mountain of debt owed directly to me. By week's end, my wealth was secure, his leverage was gone, and I had enough forensic evidence to send him to prison for a decade. But I wanted one last thing. I wanted to catch him in the act, so no lawyer could ever spin it as a misunderstanding. I wanted his true intent on camera. So one evening I sat at my desk and drafted the perfect bait. A document on gold company letterhead titled Immediate Transfer of CEO Authority. Dense legal language surrendering my position, my banking authority, and asset control directly to Nathan. Exactly what they were trying to force through the courts, packaged as a voluntary gift. I printed it, set it in the centre of my desk, laid my favourite gold fountain pen beside it, and left the signature line glaringly blank, as though I were considering it but hadn't finished. To a desperate man, an unsigned transfer of power is an invitation to forgery. In the hollowed spine of an old book on the shelf, I'd installed a motion-activated microcamera. Its feed synced to my burner phone. I adjusted the lamp so the document glowed at the centre of the room, then left the office door slightly ajar. I told Nathan I'd left important paperwork on the desk and asked him not to disturb my office, then said I was exhausted and going up to sleep. But Eleanor and I did not sleep there. I told her quietly to pack a small bag. We slipped out the side entrance like fugitives, and a car Gerald had arranged carried us to a secure suite in a downtown hotel. There, I connected my laptop to the camera feed on a large monitor. Eleanor sat beside me on the edge of the bed, a shawl around her shoulders, and we watched the empty office, the pen gleaming faintly, the trap undisturbed. For over an hour, nothing. Eleanor leaned against my shoulder, wanting desperately to believe our son would simply walk past that door and go to bed. But I knew the pull of desperation. At 1:15 in the morning, the office door creaked open. Eleanor gasped, her fingers digging into my arm. Two dark shapes stepped inside. Nathan flicked on the small reading lamp. Vanessa followed, quick and quiet. They did not move like a couple checking on a father. They moved like burglars. Nathan went straight to the desk, leaned over the document and read. I watched his chest rise and fall as a slow, sickening smile spread across his face. He held the paper up to the lamp and turned to Vanessa. "Look at this," he whispered, trembling with excitement. "He actually drafted it. The old fool is handing us the whole kingdom. He's so terrified of his own memory that he's writing out our surrender for us." Vanessa snatched it, read it fast and laughed. A sharp, cruel laugh with nothing human in it. "I can't believe it. I thought we'd be fighting him in court for months. Look at him, Nathan. He's completely broken. He's nothing but a senile cash cow waiting to be milked." Eleanor began to weep silently beside me. Nathan picked up the fountain pen. "We don't even need to forge it right now," he said, chillingly calm. "We'll let him think it's his own idea. I'll bring it up at dinner Friday. Play the concerned son. Tell him how tired he looks, how he needs to step down for his health. We put this in front of him, and he signs it himself to save face." He set the pen down, aligning it with the paper. "And once he signs Friday, we secure the rest of the trust. We satisfy the enforcers, and we file the conservatorship Monday. We have him in that Montana facility by the end of the month, isolated. No lawyer, no bank, no phone. Vivian's safe, our debts are gone, and we finally have the control we deserve." Eleanor broke into deep, shaking sobs and buried her face in my shoulder. I did not offer comfort. I wrapped my arm around her, held her hand, and kept my eyes on the two rats scurrying happily through the maze I had built for them. Let them have their Friday dinner, I whispered. It'll be their last. Friday came heavy and hot. Eleanor and I drove up the winding driveway of the estate as the sun sank behind the trees. Valets, a courtyard packed with luxury cars. Vivian had not planned an intimate family dinner to execute her coup. She'd gathered an audience, her circle of wealthy acquaintances, invited to witness her magnificent new life, funded entirely with my employees' retirement savings. I squeezed Eleanor's hand before we got out. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes were steady. We had spent 2 days grieving the son we thought we knew. Now we were simply walking into a den of predators, ready to lock the door behind us. A hired butler ushered us in. The great room had been turned into a lavish cocktail reception, a string quartet in the corner, drowned out by Vivienne's laughter as she held court, draped in silk and emeralds, spinning stories about her real estate acumen. Nathan hovered behind her, pale, sweating, clutching a black leather folder against his chest, knuckles white. Vanessa rushed over with a wide, insincere smile. "Warren, Eleanor, we're so thrilled you could make it," she said, loud enough for the nearby guests. "We know how hard it is for you to get out these days, Warren, with your energy being so unpredictable lately." I leaned heavily on a cane I'd bought just for the occasion, let my hand shake, and widened my eyes into vacant confusion. "Thank you, dear," I rasped. "I'm just glad I remembered the way. My mind plays tricks on me lately." Nathan exhaled with relief. He guided me to a velvet armchair, treating me like a brittle antique, and set the leather folder on the side table beside me. The bait, the forged transfer, waiting for my blind signature. "Just rest, Dad," he said. "We'll move to the dining room shortly. I want to discuss some family business with you after the main course, something to make your life easier." I nodded blankly and watched the evening curdle. Vivian paraded her friends through the house, bragging about the imported marble she'd personally selected. Eleanor stood quietly near the wall, trying to be invisible. But Vivian would not allow it. She snapped her fingers at a passing caterer who didn't hear her over the music, then turned her gaze on my wife, Tonne. "Eleanor, darling," she called out, cutting through the room. "Since you're just standing there, be a dear and pass these appetizers to the guests. The hired help is hopeless tonight, and you're so naturally accustomed to serving people in that quaint little kitchen of yours." The room paused. The guests watched to see how my wife would take being ordered around like a servant. Eleanor's face flushed deep red, but she kept her dignity. She picked up the tray and walked silently among the guests. Vanessa smirked and whispered something to the woman beside her. I gripped the armrests and stayed seated. The rage pressed against my ribs, but the timing wasn't right. At last, dinner was announced. We moved into the formal dining room, taking places around a long mahogany table under a dripping crystal chandelier. Nathan sat across from me, the black folder resting beside his plate. He couldn't stop touching it. I kept performing, rattling my silverware, spilling a few drops of water on the white cloth, letting Nathan watch my trembling hands with barely hidden glee. And Vivian, emboldened by her audience and her sense of total victory, decided to twist the knife one more time. She leaned over her plate and pointed her wine glass at my wife. "I must say, Eleanor, you managed not to drop a single tray tonight," she declared, her voice carrying across the silent table. "You really do make an excellent little maid. Perhaps I'll keep you on permanently once Warren is finally taken care of." I stopped chewing. I set my fork down on the table, slowly, deliberately, and I stopped trembling. I lifted my chin and looked directly into Vivian's eyes with perfect, terrible clarity. The whole room went silent. I did not raise my voice. When you have spent 5 decades commanding boardrooms, you learn how to command a room without shouting. I let the silence stretch until the discomfort became a physical weight. "My wife," I said, my voice steady and clear, and utterly unlike the feeble old man I'd been playing all evening, "is the foundation of everything you see around you. She built a life of substance and loyalty, while you spent yours accumulating debt and vanity. You will not speak to her that way again. You are not a queen holding court, Vivian. You are a guest at this table, and you will show respect to the woman who actually knows what work means." The words sliced through the manufactured elegance. Eleanor straightened, looking at me with surprise and relief. Vivian's jaw fell open. She glanced around at her audience, their eyes wide with scandalized delight. And her shock boiled instantly into fury. She shot to her feet so fast her chair toppled backward onto the rug. "How dare you!" she shrieked, all her manufactured elegance gone. She grabbed her wineglass and hurled it to the floor, where it shattered and sprayed red across the baseboards like a wound. Guests gasped and shrank back. Vanessa cried out and rushed to her mother's side, glaring at me as though I'd struck her. "You ungrateful old fool!" Vivian screamed, pointing a diamond-covered finger at my face. "You come into my home and speak to me like this in front of my friends. Nathan, do something. Handle your father right now, or I will have security drag him into the street. He's out of control." Nathan was already up, his face dark red, the cold panic he'd been suppressing all night finally breaking through. His plan was unravelling in front of the very people he'd hoped to impress. He marched around the table, stopped inches from my chair, and pointed at my face, his chest heaving. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed. "You're embarrassing Vivian in front of half the city. You're having an episode, Dad. You're confused. Apologise to her right now. Apologise this instant. Or I swear I'm putting you in a home tomorrow morning. You clearly can't function in polite society anymore." He was playing his final card, weaponising the threat of the facility, certain the fear of being locked away would break me. The room was dead silent. The quartet had stopped. The caterers stood frozen in the doorways with their trays. The wealthy guests held their breath, eyes darting between Nathan's furious face and my calm one. No one dared move. Nathan, mistaking my stillness for surrender, spun to the side table and snatched the black leather folder. He tore it open, pulled out the gold-embossed document, grabbed the fountain pen, and slammed both down on the table in front of me. He pressed the pen into my hand and leaned down, his face inches from mine, his eyes wide with greed. "Sign this," he said slowly, emphasizing every syllable, "and apologise. Now." I did not flinch. I looked down at the pen resting in my fingers. Nathan leaned closer, sure he'd finally broken me. Instead, I gripped both ends of the pen and bent it until the gold barrel snapped in half with a sharp crack. Black ink burst from the cartridge, spilling across the desk and bleeding into the forged paper. I opened my hands and let the broken pieces clatter down onto the ruined document. I looked straight into my son's eyes. "You're fired," I said. The 3 words fell into the freezing air. Nathan's sneer dissolved into blank confusion. He stumbled back a step, blinking as if I'd struck him. He opened his mouth to launch into another tirade about my mental state. And I did not give him the chance. I turned my head toward the arched doorway and gave a single, deliberate nod. The doors swung open with a thud. Gerald Voss walked in, his face a mask of clinical calm. And he was not alone. Flanking him were 2 broad-shouldered men in dark suits, badges gleaming under the chandelier. Federal agents. The gasp from the guests was instant. The manufactured elegance of Vivienne's party evaporated. Nathan stumbled backward into a chair, all the blood draining from his face, looking from Gerald to the agents and back to me. Finally understanding that the senile old man he thought he was hunting had been hunting him all along, I placed my hands flat on the table and pushed myself up, standing tall and steady, leaving the cane behind. I looked around at Vivienne's wealthy, superficial guests. "My son," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room, "has spent months convincing everyone here that my mind is failing. A convenient story about an aging father losing his grip. But the truth is far worse. Nathan is not a concerned son. He is a desperate, cornered criminal." "Dad, please," Nathan squeaked. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," I said, silencing him. "I know about the hollow shell company in Delaware. I know about the fraudulent $45,000 monthly advisory fees routed to Meridian Trust of Nevis. I know about the wires from there to the private lenders who bought Vivienne's Palm K debt." Vivienne gasped, her hand flying to the emeralds at her throat. The guests around her shifted away. "Vivienne does not own this new life," I continued, turning my gaze on her. "She poured her real fortune into a resort that collapsed years ago, and she's been living on borrowed money ever since. She owes private enforcers over $3 million, compounding weekly. And to keep them off her, my son crossed a line no man ever comes back from." I looked at Nathan. He didn't just skim from the operating accounts. He drained over $4.6 million directly from the Ashford Precision Employee Retirement Trust. He stole the savings of 400 families to pay for his mother-in-law's debts. A wave of disgusted murmurs rolled through the room. Vanessa buried her face in her hands. "But Nathan is also a coward," I said. "He knew stealing from that trust would draw the authorities, so he used my digital signature to forge documents naming me as the guarantor of Vivian's debt. He forged executive orders authorizing the shell companies. He built an entire criminal enterprise designed to frame his own father for a federal crime. And when he realized the audit was only 3 weeks away, he and Vanessa drafted an emergency conservatorship petition, planning to have me declared demented and locked in an isolated facility in Montana, silenced permanently so they could take everything and cover their tracks." The agent stepped further into the room. Nathan dropped to his knees on the rug and began to sob, the arrogant executive gone, replaced by a broken child facing the consequences of his own greed. Vivian, however, was not ready to surrender. Her eyes darted around the room, and she bolted for the doorway, silk rustling. She didn't get far. The agent stepped smoothly into her path. She slammed into them, cried out, stumbled back, and realized there was nowhere left to run. I reached into my jacket and drew out a folded legal document, distinct from the ink-ruined forgery on the table. I held it up so the light caught the official notary seals. "And one more thing about this house," I said. The room went silent again. Even Vivian went still. "When Eleanor and I provided the $1.4 million for the down payment," I said, my voice level, "you both assumed it was an unconditional gift from a doting father. You paraded around this mansion, bragging about your real estate genius. But I did not write a personal check, Nathan. If you had read the disclosure forms your own lawyers sent to closing, you'd have noticed where the funds came from. That capital did not come from my savings. It came from the treasury of Ashford Precision, structured and recorded as a secured corporate loan, tied to your continued employment, and secured by a deed of trust the company holds against this property." Nathan stared up at me, his mouth opening and closing. "And since you have embezzled millions from the employee trust," I continued, "your employment is terminated, effective immediately, for gross financial misconduct, which means that corporate loan is now in catastrophic default. I am not merely seizing your assets, I am foreclosing on this property." I dropped the document on the table beside the shattered pen. "This is a formal notice of eviction. You do not own this house. The bank does not own this house. Ashford Precision owns every brick and every square inch of that lawn. You have 24 hours to take what you can carry and go. If you're still here tomorrow evening, security will remove you." Vanessa let out a piercing shriek and spun on Nathan. "You promised me we were safe," she screamed. "You swore your father was too stupid to trace the transfers. You told me the money was untraceable. You ruined everything." Before Nathan could stammer an excuse, she slapped him hard across the face. The sound cracked through the silent room like a shot. "I'm filing for divorce the second I leave this house," she spat. "I am not going to prison because you were incompetent. You're on your own." And she turned and marched out, pushing past the stunned guest without looking back. The agents closed the circle around Vivian. She shrank against the wall, all her aristocratic arrogance gone. "You can't do this to me," she stammered. "I sit on 4 charity boards. I have powerful lawyers. I'll sue you all." The lead agent produced a pair of handcuffs. "Vivian Fairmont," he said, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud a federally protected retirement fund. You have the right to remain silent." She screamed and thrashed as the cuffs closed around her wrists, begging her friends for help. Not one of them moved. They only stared. The agents walked her out, her shrieks fading down the hall until the front door shut. Nathan crawled forward on his hands and knees and grasped the hem of my trousers. "Dad, please," he sobbed. "I'm your son, your own flesh and blood. You can't leave me with nothing. I'll confess to everything. Just forgive me. Please don't walk away." I looked down at him, and I felt nothing. The son I had loved for 40 years had died a long time ago, replaced by this creature slowly, without my noticing. I reached down, pulled my trousers free of his grip, and said nothing. I turned to Eleanor, standing tall near the doorway, radiating a quiet, unbreakable strength, and I took her arm. We walked out together, our footsteps echoing through the cavernous house, stepping over the shattered glass of Vivian's ruined wine, and out into the cool, dark, peaceful night. By Monday, the fallout was total. The raid was too large to keep quiet. Local papers and financial blogs seized the story. Forged documents, offshore wires, the theft of employee retirement savings. Nathan's reputation was obliterated overnight. Partners cancelled contracts. Old friends stopped answering his calls. His country club quietly revoked his membership by the end of the day. Vivienne was denied bail entirely. The prosecutors laid out her ties to violent private enforcers and the enormous flight risk she posed. She was remanded to federal custody to await a trial that would consume the rest of her years. Vanessa, true to her nature, wasted no time mourning. Her lawyers filed for divorce by Wednesday, petitioning for whatever assets hadn't been frozen. She publicly disavowed any knowledge of the crimes and abandoned Nathan completely. They had built their marriage on shared greed, and when the money vanished, so did the loyalty. But my attention was on the innocent. That Thursday I returned to Ashford Precision and called every worker, manager and clerk into the main plant floor. The air was thick with fear. They'd seen the news. They knew their retirement fund had been raided. I stood on a shipping pallet and spoke to them plainly. I confirmed the truth. My son had stolen over $4.6 million from their retirement trust. A heavy silence fell. Then I told them the rest. I had liquidated my personal holdings and moved the plant's mortgage into my own trust. Their futures, I told them, were not tied to my son's failures. And using my own secured wealth, I had already refunded every single dollar drained from their accounts. The money was wired. The trust was whole. Their retirements were safe. And I pledged, personally, to match their next year of contributions as an apology for what my family had put them through. The silence broke into tearful relief. Men and women who had worked those floors for 20 and 30 years came forward to shake my hand, some of them weeping. I had walked into that plant a man broken by his own son's betrayal. I walked out surrounded by the loyalty of my true family, the people who understood work and dignity and respect. Eleanor and I sold the estate we'd never wanted to live in and bought a small single-storey home on the quiet edge of the city. A wraparound porch, a little garden for her, and a peace we hadn't felt in years. We settled into a gentle routine and let the wounds begin to heal. It was late one Tuesday in November when that peace was tested. A violent storm had rolled in after dinner, wind howling through the bare oaks, freezing rain slapping the windows. Eleanor and I had gone to bed early. Then, exactly at midnight, the doorbell rang, long and frantic, cutting through the storm. No one arrives at a quiet house in a downpour at midnight with good news. I pulled on my robe and went down. When I opened the door, my son was standing on the porch. Nathan was unrecognisable, soaked to the bone, his ruined suit plastered to a shivering frame. No coat, hair matted, eyes hollow and bloodshot. He looked as though he'd aged 10 years in a month. He had nothing with him, no bag, not even a phone. He fell to his knees on the wet concrete. "Dad," he wept, "please. I have nowhere to go. I've walked for miles. I have nothing left." I stood in the doorway blocking it and said nothing. I did not offer a towel or a warm room. "It wasn't my fault," he sobbed, and there it was. Even now on his knees in the rain, he could not take responsibility. "It was all Vanessa and Vivienne. They brainwashed me. Vivienne was drowning in that debt and Vanessa threatened to leave me. They forced me to forge those documents. They made me take the retirement money. They convinced me you were losing your mind. It was their plan from the beginning." I looked down at him. This was the boy I had carried on my shoulders through summer parks, the young man I'd walked into his first day of work, and the shivering creature in front of me held no resemblance to a son. He was a predator, with its fangs pulled, begging shelter from the storm he had built himself. "I'm not asking to come inside," he pleaded. "Just let me sleep in the garage, on the floor, just for tonight so I don't freeze. I'll be gone before sunrise, please, Dad. I'm your only son." I leaned forward so my voice would carry over the wind. I did not shout. I spoke with the quiet, absolute finality of a judge handing down a sentence. "I gave you an empire," I said. "I handed you a legacy of honour, a life most men never dream of, and an open door to everything I built with my hands. And in return, you tried to put me in a cage. You conspired to lock me away in the dark, to erase me, just to feed your own greed." He tried to speak. I did not let him. "You are not my son anymore, Nathan. You are the consequence of your own choices, and consequences must be faced alone." I stepped back into the warmth of my hallway. He lunged forward, hands slapping the threshold, but I was already moving. I took the brass handle, looked at him one last time and pulled the door shut. The wood clicked into the frame, silencing his cries, and I turned the deadbolt with a solid, final thud. I stood in the quiet hallway a long moment, listening to the rain, and I understood at last that the man I'd mourned did not die that night on my porch. He had died years ago, replaced slowly by a stranger. My breathing was even, the weight was gone. I walked into the living room, where the fire glowed warm and amber, and Eleanor sat in her chair with a blanket across her lap. She looked up, searching my face for any sign of regret. I simply smiled, sat beside her, and took her hand. And we sat together in the golden light of the hearth, listening to the storm rage harmlessly against our thick walls. We were safe. Our legacy was protected from the people who had tried to tear it apart. And every year we had left belonged, at last, to us. Blood makes you related. But loyalty and respect are what make someone family. As a parent, every instinct tells you to protect your child, to hand them the world on a silver platter. But blind generosity poured into an entitled heart doesn't grow gratitude. It grows a monster. Never let your love blind you to disrespect. And never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, treat you as something to be used and discarded in their own selfish game. Sometimes the most profound act of love, for yourself and for the truth, is finding the courage to close the door on the people who only ever saw your worth in dollar signs. Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your own peace? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this story moved you, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories of betrayal, survival, and the quiet justice that finds us in the end. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Sleep well and protect your peace.